Thank you very much, Mr. Sanjeev Chopra, for your kind words of introduction and also for the warmth with which you have invited me to speak at Valley of Words. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure to be with all of you today. In 1991, when I photographed the 2nd century BC to 5th century AD paintings of Ajanta, I was told with the true colors and details for the first time. I was invited by the leading museums and universities around the world to show these, to speak and to show these photographs. Now, you would be happy to know that there was a unanimous response everywhere. At all these institutions, the leading art historians and critics of art were gathered to see the Ajanta paintings. And there was a unanimous response that surely this must be the finest art of humankind. And I was told, not just the finest art for paintings of that period, mainly around the 5th century, but in fact, the finest art coming right up till today. It was pointed out that much of the technical virtuosity, which was seen for the first time in the art of other countries, for instance, in the late Renaissance, this technical virtuosity was already present in the 5th century Ajanta paintings. In fact, there were many other qualities in these paintings which other art only accomplished in the Impressionistic period, the Expressionistic period, and even as late as in modern art. But it was when I photographed the 10th century Brihadishvara paintings of the inner ambulatory in 1992, when I was told by the leading historians that we have to revise our understanding of the history of Indian paintings. And when I asked why that was so, I was informed that the paintings of Ajanta were known, but they were treated as a flash in the pan because Indian paintings before Ajanta were not known, and Indian paintings after Ajanta for the next 800 years were not known. However, now that I was showing them 10th century paintings which had the same technical virtuosity as the 5th century Ajanta paintings, there was obviously and clearly seen a continuous tradition of painting in ancient India which was not before known. I had the good fortune thereafter to go on and document other paintings of the 5th century, the 6th century, the 7th century, the 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th, and 13th centuries. And indeed, we are able to now clearly establish a continuous tradition of ancient Indian paintings, which is in fact the basis, clearly seen now as the basis for the manuscript and miniature paintings which were to follow. Now, what makes this ancient art so valuable to the world and so beautiful is the vision of life which it contains. It is a vision which sees the same in you and in me and in all the animals, the birds, the flowers, even the trees, even the breeze that moves the leaves of the trees. It is all seen as part of the one. And obviously, with such a vision, every line of the painter displays a grace and compassion. It is this infinitely compassionate vision which comes before us in the ancient art of India. The philosophy of aesthetics was developed at a very early age in India. In this philosophy, it is understood that our response to something truly beautiful in nature, as a beautiful sunrise, or in art, let's say a painting of Ajanta, our response in that moment is akin to Brahmanand itself, the final bliss of salvation itself. For in that moment, the veils of illusion, Maya or Mithya, are lifted, and we are looking at the grace which underlies all that there is. And as you would imagine, that is why art was of fundamental importance in the Indian philosophic traditions. That is why there were thousands and thousands and thousands of works of art, many of which still survive and come to us today. Now, when we look at these beautiful deities who are presented to us in ancient Indian art, it is important to remember that in the ancient philosophic vision of India, which comes to us from the Upanishads, there are no gods, there are deities. These deities are personifications of concepts and of the qualities which are within us. The best of these qualities: compassion, grace, kindness, knowledge, the vigor within us with which we would combat the demons of our ignorance, such as the personification in Durga. These are all personified and brought before us as deities. The idea is that when we look upon the deities, when we meditate upon the deities, we would awaken those qualities which are within us in our response to their grace. And if these qualities grow within us and fill us completely, then one day we have become that deity. So such is the sacred purpose and such is the importance which is given to the art of India. I will take the pleasure of taking you on a journey through some of this art. If you'll allow me to share my screen. Yes. And this is an enchanted place. It is the gorge of the Vaghora River in Western India, in Maharashtra, where 31 caves were hewn out of the living rock in two phases. One phase around the 2nd century BCE and the second phase around the 5th century CE. And these caves were sculpted beautifully within the heart of the mountain itself. They were sculpted, pillars were created inside. There was beautiful deities who were made, and there was the most wonderful painting which was made upon the walls. Now the caves are dark and strong lights are not allowed to be used. So earlier, the way that the paintings were seen And even when they were photographed earlier, they look like this. However, even in this orangish light, Ajanta was recognized to be of great world importance. It was acknowledged as the fountainhead of all the Buddhist art of Asia, and in fact also the fountainhead of the classic tradition of painting in the Asian countries. However, I had developed a technique by then of photographing in extremely low light, and the true colors which I was able to capture of this painting are like this. The blues and greens were earlier lost owing to the orangish light which was allowed inside the caves in order to preserve the paintings. Now, this is in cave 1. It is a detail of a painting of about the 5th century CE, and it is a princely figure bearing an offering of lotuses for the Bodhisattva Vajrapani, who you see in front of him. You see him here. Bodhisattva, as you know, is a being who's on his way to salvation. Vajrapani means bearer of the thunderbolt. The thunderbolt is one of the earliest images in Indian philosophic thought and in Indian art. In fact, the earliest deity that survives in Indian art is Lord Indra in the Buddhist of Bhaja in Western India. And Lord Indra is also the bearer of the thunderbolt. In fact, the latest form of Buddhism which is practiced is also known as Vajrayana Buddhism, which means the vehicle of the thunderbolt, because its logic is supposed to be as striking as a bolt of thunder. And here the Bodhisattva Vajrapani brings before us, with his glorious crown, brings before us the majesty of the Spirit within us. Also in cave 1, not very far from the painting of the Vajrapani, is he, the Bodhisattva Padmapani, the bearer of the lotus. Whereas the Vajrapani brought before us the majesty of the Spirit, the Padmapani brings to us the peace of the Spirit within us. Over his right shoulder to your left, you would see that heavenly musician, part human and part bird, playing that musical instrument and singing. To your right, over his left shoulder, you would see the monkeys playing, and above them you would see the geese. However, with all this activity painted around him, he looks within. It is this life of the Spirit within. It is this peace of the Spirit within which fills the world of the Ajanta paintings. Again in cave 1 of Ajanta, not very far from the painting of the Padmapani, a couple in harmony, a sense of harmony which pervades the world of Ajanta. In fact, there are these thousands of figures painted everywhere in these glorious caves. And all of them exude this sense of harmony. it's a wonder to move in these caves and to experience these harmonious visions upon the wall. Now you might notice the gradual lightening and deepening of color, which persuades your eye of the roundedness of form. This rendering, this shading is extremely unusual in world art for paintings of such an early period, but it is everywhere at Ajanta, and in fact is part of the tradition of art which is seen to emanate from Ajanta and travel to all the corners of Asia. On the left wall of Cave 1, the Mahajanak Jatak. King Mahajanak is a bodhisattva. He is a previous birth of Lord Buddha. And here you see him, the figure near the a little left of the center of this frame, looking up to a hermit who is giving a sermon. You might notice the antelope who are listening to the sermon of the hermit with as much rapt attention as any of the human figures. For indeed, in this vision of life contained in this art, the animals are no different at all from the human figures. A great lesson from ancient times, a great lesson from this art which we must learn. For indeed, we are all one. And when we recognize that, we are filled with the compassion which you see in this art. And I'm sure that there is every kind of benefit to the entire world from such a vision, the recognition of the oneness of all of creation. I take you now to a closer view of King Mahajanak. Now, Mahajanak was a great king, a powerful king who had in fact won back the lands which had earlier been lost by his father. But you see here, with what humility, he sits on the ground, with his hands folded before him, and looks up at the hermit with a look of adoration upon his face, which even the damage of so many centuries has not managed to remove. It is this humility with which we rise. It is this humility which is the message of this art. Having heard the sermon of the hermit, Mahajanak decides to renounce his princely life, to give up his palace life, and to go into the forest as an ascetic. Here he is announcing this decision in the palace. Behind him is his mother, who is looking sad, and in front of him is his wife, Queen Shivali. Now, her eyes are painted in a very particular way. By the time this art was being created, the oldest known treatise on art making had been penned out of traditions which were long ongoing. It is called the Chitra Sutra. Now, the Chitra Sutra gives thousands of guidelines to the painter on how to make landscapes, how to make animals, how to make different kinds of human beings, 5 different ways to carry out shading. It also gives 5 different shapes of eyes which would convey different expressions. And the shape of the eyes of Queen Shivali here are exactly that, which is eyes of a person sad or weeping, as indeed we may expect her to be. For she hears from her husband that he is going to go away into the forest. Now, her lower garment is woven in the form of ikkat, which is practiced till today right across the Deccan. Her upper garment, for there is an upper garment, and you see some design upon it at her hip. Now, this upper garment is so fine that it is practically transparent. You're reminded that this is a time when India was very famous for its finest of textiles. In fact, Pliny the Elder writes in Rome in the first century CE that Roman coffers are being emptied for buying too many fine textiles from India. A century later, Emperor Vesuvian is saying practically the same thing. In fact, the Deccan was a great place of the growing of cotton and the creation of these wonderful textiles. In the Western Deccan, you had many Greeks who were living even in the BC period, and you have their inscriptions where they have patronized pillars, etc., in Buddhist caves in what is now Maharashtra. In the Eastern Deccan, there is much evidence of uh, large Roman colonies of traders that used to exist. The Deccan had perhaps the most cosmopolitan, the most sophisticated, urban, and urbane culture of the first millennium CE period, perhaps in the entire world. It's amazing to see the reflections of this in the art of Ajanta, to see the reflections of this in the art of Amravati and other places. Now, if you were to look at the strings of pearls which dangle below uh, Queen Shivali's bosom, you will notice a curvature in those pearl strings. This curvature is what persuades your eye of the movement. Now, such details were not only being made in the art of the 5th century, as you can see here, but in fact, the Chitra Sutra also mentions that these details must be made. The Chitra Sutra expects such a high quality of art from the painter. It expects the painter to be able to make the movement of leaves in the breeze, the movement of waves upon the water, all this in the unmoving medium of painting. Now, behind Queen Shivali, you see these three palace maids who respond with shock, as you see upon the lower face, and who respond in sadness to the news that the king is going to be going away and will be leaving their mistress, the queen, alone. There is such an infinite warmth and sadness which is shared by the two maids seen above. It is this caring for others which fills the world of Ajanta. These thousands of figures that are painted upon the wall are all shown caring for others. It is this sense of compassion which fills this marvelous world of the Ajanta paintings. And having decided to give up his palace life. You see here King Mahajanak riding out of the palace. He will go to the jungle to become an ascetic. You see that inward look has already come in his eyes. He begins on another journey, the journey within, the most important journey. Cave 17 of Ajanta, the Vishvantara Jatak. Now, Prince Vishvantar is the last birth of the Bodhisattva, who will after this be born as Gautama Siddhartha, who will gain enlightenment to become a Buddha. Now here you see Prince Vishvantar, the dark figure with his wife, Princess Madri. And he is also announcing to her, telling her that he will be going away into the forest to be an ascetic for other reasons this time, other than the reasons of King Mahajanak. He advises the princess to stay back in the palace as she will not be used to the hard life outside. Princess Madri, however, decides to go with him. Now, if you look at the purse in the hand of the princess, you would see that curvature of the purse strings, which tells you that she is swinging that purse. Marvelous detail for an early painting, almost unbelievable detail for a painting of that time. You would see the perspective in the receding pillars and in the elliptical mouth of the vessel which this man carries, the man with the green jacket. And there's so much else which is beautiful in this 5th century painting. Cave 17, the Mahisha Jatak. Lord Buddha born in a previous birth as a Mahisha, a buffalo. The pesky monkey is troubling him, but the kindly Bodhisattva does not mind. In fact, you would see that smile upon the face of the Mahisha. And indeed, the artist would have meant for you to be able to see that smile. For in this vision, the Mahisha is just like you or I. In fact, even as one says this, one is reminded of the fact that in the Jataka stories, the finest of human qualities are shown in the animals. So they are in fact shown to be perhaps far better than us. The greatest qualities of character, generosity, warmth, nobility are so beautifully portrayed in the Bodhisattva animals. It is indeed a marvelous vision of life in which all of them, all of us, are all seen to be part of the same creation. Cave 17, the Shaddant Jatak. I show you this because in this Jatak, large animals had also been shown. You see the feet of the elephant in the top right of the frame. But while elephants are being shown in this painting, if you were to look at the branch of the tree close to this man's head, I will take you to a closer view. And yes, those are ants seen climbing up that tree. If you were to go to Ajanta, you might not be able to see them. But still, the painter has made them. For in this painter's vision, the world would not be complete without its ants. What a wonderful vision. Another painting of the 5th century period. This is the Buddhist caves of Pital Khoda, about an hour and a half drive away from Ellora, which is on the edge of Aurangabad. And again, it has Buddhist caves which were made from the 2nd century BCE period till the 5th century, 6th century period. And though there is so much damage, enough survives of these paintings to bring you even today the tender look, the kindness and warmth of this painting. Again, 5th century, the Buddhist caves of Bagh in central India, now in Madhya Pradesh. As the crow flies, these are not that distant, these caves of Bagh, from the caves of Western India. In fact, all these caves lie on trade routes which used to connect Nalla Supara, the great ancient port where Mumbai is at present, with Ujjain and Vidisha. Ujjain was a great city, great center of philosophic development, and Vidisha was the granary of central India. So this trade route connected Nalla Supara till there. And the trade route passed through those caves you saw of Western India and these caves of Bagh in present day Madhya Pradesh. Now, the foreshortening of the bull that you see here is indeed remarkable for 5th century art. And you might notice the graphic quality of this painting, which appears to be quite like modern art. So such is the unexpected quality of these ancient paintings. The earliest surviving paintings of the Hindu tradition are of the 6th century at Badami in Karnataka. And again, there is considerable damage there, but enough survives to bring before you the tenderness of expression, which is in fact the theme of the ancient art. And even as one talks about the Buddhist and Hindu traditions, it must be noted that it is the same artists who were painting and sculpting for the Jaina, Buddhist, and Hindu traditions. And in fact, all the Buddhist caves of India, I could enumerate all of them, the caves, the stupas, the entire Buddhist heritage of ancient India, was in fact made during the rule of kings worshipping Hindu deities. In fact, all the inscriptions which survive of the ancient period in India, and that is how more than 95% of the history that we know of ancient India is known. All these inscriptions show that that every family that we know about had in it somebody worshipping a Hindu deity, somebody worshipping a Buddha, or worshipping a Jaina Tirthankar. So, separated religions in ancient India is a colonial construct which came in a much later period. Ellora, uh, 8th century, uh, painting on the ceiling of a Jaina cave. And this painting shows the beginning of the medieval tradition in Indian painting. You would notice that the painting is much more abstracted, it is much more linear, and you might notice a detail if you look closely that the further eye which we see, the lines of the further eye are protruding beyond the line of the face. Now, this is something which has been commonly seen in Jain manuscript paintings of the later period, and it has often been called by art historians as the protruding eye of the Jain manuscript paintings. However, in my documentation right across India and in the countries which reflected the Indian traditions, I found that the protruding further eye is common to the surviving wall paintings of the medieval period. Now, the more abstracted and the more dynamic look which is also given by the protruding further eye are part of the changing philosophic outlook in the period. The earlier paintings provide only the gentlest of images, whose purpose is to melt our ego and to take us towards our knowledge and salvation. In the medieval period, the great Mahaviharas and large intellectual centers have come up, where the focus has now also gone on the intellect, the dynamism of the intellect and logic, which will lead us towards the same understanding and finally towards salvation. So, this greater emphasis upon the intellect is being reflected in medieval art. Beautiful paintings of the Hindu tradition survive in niches in the outer ambulatory wall of the 7th century Kailash Natha temple in Kanchipuram. These paintings are not very easy to see because the niches are very small and these are deep inside there. So you really have to poke your head in and get a view of these beautiful paintings. This is Lord Shiva. And Kanchipuram, I must mention, was one of the greatest intellectual centers of ancient times in India. Hindu, Buddhist, and Jaina philosophy is known to have developed considerably and flourished in the city of Kanchipuram. In fact, Bodhidharma, who is famous for having founded Dhyana Buddhism or Chan Buddhism as it was called in China when he founded it there, or Zen Buddhism as it was later called in Japan where it went, is known to be from Kanchipuram. In fact, Bodhisena, who was invited by the Emperor of Japan in the 8th century to inaugurate the great Buddha temple, Todaiji, in Nara, in Japan, uh, is also most probably from the city of Kanchipuram. And the regal grandeur which you see in this painting also reflects changes in temple patronage and art which are taking place in this period. Again of the 7th century, a rarely seen beautiful painting. This is Parvati in and in a shrine in the Talagirishwara temple in remote Pannamalai in Tamil Nadu. In fact, the first time that I reached this temple in 2001, I was unable to photograph this painting because there were two locks on the door of the shrine. One key was kept by the person of the Archaeological Survey of India, and one key was kept with the temple priest. One key was available with us, but one was not. I forget which one was not, but one was not, and I was not able to see this beautiful painting then, but was able to finally take this photograph on my second visit to the Talagirishwara temple in 2005. This is a rarely seen painting and very important in this continuity of ancient Indian art. This is Parvati as she looks upon Shiva dancing as the Nataraja. Now, it is a fine philosophic concept in which the cosmic dance cannot be without her as the eternal witness. And in this role, she is known as Shivakami. The tender expression upon her face as she looks upon Shiva makes it truly a masterpiece. 9th century Sittanavasu ceiling paintings of Jaina caves of the 8th, 9th century in a very remote part of Tamil Nadu. Beautiful place, beautiful area to visit. The last time I went there through the forests, there were so many peacocks, beautiful place. Most of the sites of ancient art are located very beautifully, and one must enjoy the beauty of nature also before one enjoys the beauty of this marvelous art. And indeed, this painting is beautiful. The lotuses are made with as much tender care and as large as the face of the human figure, and he has an infinitely gentle look upon his face. The grand Brihadishvara temple at Tanjavur. By now, there were certain changes which were taking place in the patronage and the temples of India. The ancient temples were all made small. In fact, some of the caves which were hewn out of the mountains purposely had rock which was left standing outside the cave so that you would not see the cave or even the temples that were made small from a distance. The idea was that you have to make an effort to come to the place, and you have to make an effort to gain true knowledge. And the experience also of the temple and its art was a deeply personal one, where you interacted from deep inside to the warmth, the grace of the art, and allowed that art to transform you. The deities that you looked upon were mirrors which reflected the best of what there was inside you. Now, we had noticed a regal grandeur coming into the painting of the 7th century. And that also reflects a change of patronage because till before the 7th century, in the entire ancient period of India, all the temples and stupas, all the monuments to the faiths were in fact not directly patronized by any king, even though casual colonial historians uh, may give you that impression. And that's the impression you may get from school history books. But the moment you step into the research library next door, you would find the inscriptions on those monuments, which would tell you clearly that all the ancient monuments of India, all of these, were were made on the donations of the people. For instance, the great stupa at Sanchi has 631 inscriptions, which still survive out of what may have been a couple of thousand inscriptions to begin with. And these inscriptions are such. One says, I am a fisherman and I am donating this pillar of the stupa railing. Another says, I am a housewife and I am donating the architrave of this gateway of the railings. Another says, I am a tailor, etc., etc. Throughout India, monuments of the ancient period were created by the people of India, not by the kings. A marvelous fact of Indian history. Now, in the 7th century, for the first time, kings begin to, and this is the Pallava kings of South India, they begin to directly patronize the making of temples as seen at Mamalapuram in the 7th, 8th century. And that changes the tradition. And by the time you reach here to the end of the 10th century, in the great Brihadishwara temple made by King Rajaraja Chola of the Chola dynasty, uh, you find the temple here is now perhaps the tallest, it could have been the tallest building in the world at that time. So the tradition has changed, and this temple is made by the king, uh, not only to display and show the grandeur of Lord Shiva, the great Lord Shiva, Brihadishvara, but also his own grandeur and military might. Now, if you look to the left of the temple, you would not be able to make it out here, but there is a metal stairway that goes up. And if you go up that metal stairway, it takes you inside an inner ambulatory, a corridor, which runs around the Garbhagriha, the sanctum sanctorum of the temple. And the sanctum sanctorum of the temple has paintings made on the inner and outer walls. These walls have only 5.5 feet of space in between them. The feeling of grandeur as you are not able to step back very much from the paintings. These are this is a view of a painting inside the inner ambulatory of the Brihadishvara temple. Grand paintings. The temple and its paintings were meant to inspire you with awe. This is a Shaivite saint who is going up to uh, Lord Shiva. He's going up Mount Kailasha, and he is riding on the elephant of Indra, Eravat. Grand painting from the inner ambulatory. You would see the apsaras who are greeting him as he comes on his journey. And again, within the ambulatory on the walls, this is a beautiful painting of the Nataraja, Shiva and his cosmic dance. He's seen here dancing below the canopy, the golden canopy of the Chidambaram temple, which had already been made. You might notice the gentle smile upon his face. Again, from that inner ambulatory detail of a musician, you would see his hand poised to strike the little drum. Marvelous. And you would see the straps of the little drum, which so obviously convey the movement in the painting. And you can see that the painter is fully in control of his medium. He's able to show you exactly what he wishes to. End of the 10th century. The first portrait in the earliest portrait surviving in Indian painting in the ambulatory of the Brihadishvara temple. This is King Rajaraja Chola, the reddish figure, standing behind his Guru Karuvurar. Now, one of the most remarkable things about the ancient art of India is that for 1,500 years of the creation of thousands and thousands of works of art, this art brought before us people, animals, trees, flowers, so many things, the common man. But there was not even one portrait which was made, not even of the king in whose rule, during whose rule, the art was being created. There is just one exception, which is the period of the Kushana rulers who came from Central Asia, and they had portraits made of themselves in their temples in the 1st century CE. But so immediately after them, the Indian tradition reverted back to itself, and there were no portraits at all which were made until the earliest surviving portraits in sculpture are visible at Mamalapuram in the 8th century. And now the earliest surviving painting that we see is King Rajaraja Chola in the end of the 10th century. Of course, in times to come, there will be many, many, many portraits of rulers and others as the tradition keeps on evolving in India. 10th, 11th century. Here we see the temple complex of Alchi. This is known to be one of the legendary number of 108 monasteries which were made across Western Tibet Ladakh, Lahore Spiti, and Kinnaur in the 10th, 11th centuries. And these were all of them sculpted and painted by Kashmiri artists who were invited for the purpose. And Kashmir was at that time known to be a great Buddhist center. And here you see a detail of uh, the art inside made by the Kashmiri artists. And this is a green tara in a small roundel which would be just about well, less than 3 inches across. You would see that marvelous rendering of form coming from the ancient tradition. You would see that protruding further eye of the medieval tradition in India, and you would see the profusion of textiles, which reminds you that indeed Kashmir and Ladakh were on an artery of the Silk Route, which connected the eastern part of Asia with Europe. And there was this artery which came down through Kashmir and Ladakh down to Nalla Supara and Kerala in the south of India. In fact, the paintings of Alchi even display the Kalari Payat, which is the martial arts form which traveled from Kerala going up. And here you see another detail painted by the Kashmiri artists. I might mention that since the visual art of the ancient period in Kashmir was all lost, it is in the Kashmiri artists' paintings in these Trans-Himalayan monasteries that we have the only visual record of the architecture, the lifestyles and culture of Kashmir in the early period. And you would see here a temple to Balarama with a tower which has a shrine to the green Tara. And you might like to notice the musicians which are made below. And these musicians are very small in size. These are hardly 1 inch in size. But you would notice a joyousness in them. And it is this joyousness which pervades the art of Kashmir. Reminds us also that this was immediately after the period of Abhinavagupta, one of the greatest philosophers of aesthetics in India, who lived in the valley of Kashmir. And ladies and gentlemen, I am coming right to the end of the time that I have for this talk, and it has been a great pleasure to share this art with all of you. I'll be very happy to answer questions. Thank you very much.